If you've ever been lying in bed, replaying one decision, not panicking, not spiraling, just quietly feeling like your life is being measured against something that never happened, this video is for you. Because the hardest thing about regret isn't that it's loud, it's that it's calm. It doesn't shout, it doesn't insult you, it just feels true. What makes regret hard isn't that it attacks you, it's that it feels accurate. So your mind builds an alternative timeline, one where you started earlier, or stayed sober, or didn't drift, or didn't stop, and then it quietly measures your life against that. Not angrily, relentlessly. And that's the pain. Because regret isn't just thinking about the past. It's your mind comparing reality to a simplified counterfactual, which is a version of events with no uncertainty, no fear, no friction. Counterfactual, and the pain that comes from the comparison. Here's the first thing to understand, and this matters. Regret is not a verdict about who you are. Pause on that. Regret is not a verdict about who you are. In reality, regret is an informational emotion. Its job is to highlight a mismatch between what you value, the conditions you were in, and what actually happened. And when regret does its job properly, it informs future decisions. When it goes wrong, it gets misread. So most people misread regret as a verdict. That was my chance. I'm behind now. I ruined it. None of those are reflections. Those are counterfactual verdicts. A judgment about your entire life that's built on an imagined past with all the difficulty edited out. And once regret becomes a verdict, action stops feeling like movement. It starts feeling like repayment. That's when people freeze, avoid, or numb out. So if you remember nothing else from this video, remember this sentence. That's a counterfactual verdict. When regret shows up, say it. Think it. Not angrily and not dismissively. It's just classification. Where you're not arguing with the thought, instead you're changing how it's treated. So you're going from what you perceive to be a truth, and you're reframing it as a mental event. For many people, that shift alone reduces the pressure enough to breathe again. Here's the second thing to understand. Regret is a signal about fit, not about identity. It's about conditions, about the kinds of environments, demands, or roles where you were functioning well and then lost. This is why regret shows up differently for different people. For some, it points to courage they didn't exercise. For others, boundaries they didn't set. For others, seriousness they drifted away from, restraint that was never learned, structure that was lost. They're all the same mechanism, even though it's a different signal. So the mistake is letting regret replay endlessly. That's called rumination. Rumination is strongly linked to depression and paralysis. So the second tool is about translation without looping. When regret appears, ask once, what conditions was I functioning well under there? That's it. Not what should I have done, or how do I fix this, or how do I make up for it? Just the conditions. Structure, risk, intimacy, standards, commitment, restraint. You answer it once, then you stop. One pass, then containment. I'll give you a personal example. Not because it's special, but because it shows the mechanism clearly. So when I was at university, I joined the boxing club. I was a beginner, but the coach put me straight into the advanced class for some reason. It wasn't encouragement, it was a judgment. He saw something there, and I did well. I didn't like the pain. I didn't like being punched in the face. That's a big part of boxing. Rather, it was because I treated it as something to analyse and learn from. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I remember at one point the coach mentioned an upcoming international trip. He said it could be anyone, even a newcomer, even Denzel. And he looked at me. This wasn't a fantasy, it was a real trajectory. Soon after, I injured myself running. It wasn't dramatic, but it was just enough that I had to take a pause from the classes for a few weeks. During that pause, my structure completely disappeared. The gym, the standards, the seriousness, the focus. And I filled that gap with comfort. Weed, film, TV. I just went back to drifting, really. And I never went back to the class. So for years, that memory showed up as regret. But here's what it wasn't. It wasn't fear of suffering. I was already getting punched in the face. I was fine with it. What broke the trajectory wasn't pain. It was the loss of structure plus easy anesthesia. It's that distinction. That distinction really matters. Because if I'd misread that regret as I wasn't tough enough, I would have learned the wrong lesson. The regret wasn't pointing back to boxing. So here's the meaning reversal. And this is the part that actually reduced the regret, tangibly. That moment didn't prove what I am. The regret didn't show that. Instead, it revealed the conditions under which I functioned reliably. For me, that meant environments with structure, clear standards, earned feedback, one-on-one physical competition, and a complexity that I can learn and improve at. So that understanding, it didn't erase the regret overnight. That's not how it works. But it did stop it from lying to me. And having that in my head, just that realization, it helps turn a painful memory into usable information. So that's what eventually led me to sign up for a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. It wasn't redemption, but it was continuity with who I was when I was at the boxing gym. Something to be aware of is that people hear that signal of regret, think they understand, and then immediately think they need to act, solve the problem. Commonly, late at night you make vows. You start pressure projects and you try to redeem the past, big actions. But that just recreates the same paralysis psychology. So the third tool is about continuity. It's not correction. After you translate the regret, say, I don't need to honour this regret today for it to be true. And that sentence matters. It removes the urgency without dismissing meaning. Sometimes honouring regret does involve action, but it's not symbolic action. It's not big corrective gestures. Just one small continuity preserving step that matches the signal. Regret about discipline, just go to bed on time one night. Regret about intimacy, send a low stakes message. Regret about seriousness, just show up to something already scheduled. Structure, set tomorrow's start time. It's not about redemption. It's just about continuity. And this also matters for the hardest kind of regret. The classic, the one that got away. A relationship lost because of instability, addiction. That area of regret, includes real loss. Someone deserves to grieve for what they lost. But grief becomes destructive when it adds that verdict. Something like, that was my only chance. This defines my life now. So the reframe here isn't optimism, it's containment. Along the lines of, this pain is grief, not evidence that my future is closed. Or this regret doesn't prove they were the only one. It proves the kind of person I don't want to be again. That lets the loss matter without turning it into a life sentence. So is the full, in the moment sequence, when that regret rears its head. 1, recognizing the emotion and telling yourself, that's a counterfactual verdict. 2, what conditions was I functioning well under there? 3, what's one small action that preserves continuity today? Then you stop. No processing loop, no pressure, no vows. Because regret isn't something you solve once and never feel again. It still shows up. But when it stops being treated as a verdict, it stops collapsing time, identity, and future into a single judgment. It becomes a signal that you translate, and then you return to your life. If this helped you, come back to it. This isn't a one-watch idea. You don't need to undo your past for it to matter. You just need to stop mistaking regret for a sentence being passed on who you are. Because once regret stops being a verdict, your future stops being a repayment plan, and continuity becomes possible again.